Claire and David thought they had finally done it. After years of saving, they had scraped together enough for a down payment on a little house in the suburbs. It wasn't perfect. The paint was faded, the roof needed work, but it was theirs. The neighborhood seemed safe, almost idyllic. Children rode bikes in the evenings. Older couples tended their gardens. Porch lights glowed warm and inviting after sundown. On their first evening, as they carried in boxes, 3 different neighbors came over with smiles and introductions. Everyone was kind, friendly. Everyone except the man next door, Mr. Willis. Claire noticed him the first time she glanced up from the yard. Tall, thin, stooped shoulders. Always in that gray jacket, no matter the weather. He stood in his window, blinds tilted just enough to see out, watching. When she waved, he didn't wave back. The fence between their houses was old, weathered wood with splintering slats. Knots dotted the boards like unblinking eyes. One morning, while Claire pulled weeds, she felt it, that cold, prickling sensation of being watched. She looked up. For the briefest moment, she swore she saw an eye staring through one of the fence knots. Wide, unblinking. By the time she focused, it was gone. She told David that night over dinner. He chuckled. He's just curious about us. New neighbors after all, don't take it so seriously. Claire forced a laugh, but unease twisted in her stomach. 2 weeks later, she came home from work early. The house was quiet. Sunlight stretched long shadows across the backyard. As she carried groceries inside, her eyes flicked toward the fence. She froze. A pale finger poked through one of the holes. Not still. Moving. Tracing slow, deliberate circles in the air, as though taunting her. Claire dropped the groceries and screamed. The finger vanished instantly. David ran outside, searched the neighbor's yard. Nothing. When he knocked on Mr. Willis's door, no one answered. The next morning, Claire saw him at his mailbox. He nodded at her, but his eyes never left hers. Cold. Unblinking. She hurried inside, her hands shaking. The nights grew worse. The dog sometimes growled at nothing, staring at the backyard. Claire often woke to the sound of creaking wood, the fence bending under weight. Once, lying in bed, she swore she heard soft breathing outside their window. Then came the scratching. One evening, with David working late, Claire sat on the couch watching TV. From the back door came a faint scratching. Slow. Deliberate. She muted the TV, holding her breath. The scratching grew louder. She crept to the kitchen, flicked on the porch light. Through the sliding glass door, she saw it. An eye, pressed against the gap between the fence slats, watching her. Claire screamed and the dog lunged at the door, barking furiously. By the time David got home, the yard was empty, but the next morning they found footprints in the dirt. Bah, deep. Long toes clawing into the soil. Claire begged David to call the police, but he hesitated. What do we say? That our neighbor looks at us funny. That's not a crime. But even his voice was tight, uneasy. That weekend, Claire hung laundry outside. As the sheets flapped in the breeze, she caught sight of movement. A shadow behind the fence. Mr. Willis, face pressed close to a knot in the wood, watching her. She dropped the sheet and bolted inside, heart racing. That night, David had had enough. He stormed to Mr. Willis's front porch and pounded on the door. No answer. But from inside came a sound, a laugh. Low, wet, not entirely human. Sleep became impossible. Claire closed every blind, locked every door, but still she felt eyes on her. One night she woke at 3 a.m. The dog whined low, ears flat. The fence swayed, wood bending under unseen weight. And then, pale hands curled over the top of the fence. One, then another, gripping tight, as though something was climbing. Claire screamed for David. By the time he got to the window, the yard was empty. But the fence now had dozens of new holes. Not knots, not cracks. Clean round holes, all perfectly aligned at eye level, like someone had spent the night making windows to watch through. The next morning they packed bags, left to stay with family. When they returned a week later, the house was untouched. But the fence was gone, every plank removed, and leaning against the back door was Mr. Willis's gray jacket, neatly folded. The police searched his house the next day. Inside, the air was cold, dusty, no furniture, no food, nothing, except the upstairs room, the blinds tilted open. And on the floor, the wood was worn smooth in a perfect oval, as though someone had stood there for years, watching, and yet neighbors whispered that they still saw him. Sometimes at night, when the moon was high, a figure lingered at the edge of Claire and David's empty yard, standing still, silent, as though waiting for the fence to grow back. Mia had always wanted a place of her own. After years of cramped apartments with roommates who never washed dishes and landlords who didn't care, the quiet little two-story complex on the edge of town felt like a gift. It wasn't flashy. The paint was faded, the hallway smelled faintly of mildew, but it was affordable and, most importantly, hers. Her unit was on the ground floor, tucked into a corner with tall windows that let in the morning sun. On her first day, she unpacked slowly, humming to herself, setting up her books, her small plants, and the kettle for tea. For the first time in years, she felt she could breathe. The landlord was an older man with deep creases in his face and tired eyes. He spoke little, handing her the keys with an almost hurried motion. "You'll like it here," he said softly. "It's quiet. Don't mind the noises upstairs." Mia frowned. "So someone lives above me?" He paused too long, then shook his head. "No, the building creaks, old wood." And before she could ask more, he walked away, disappearing down the hall. The first night was peaceful. She cooked pasta, watched TV, and crawled into bed with a book. Just past 11 p.m., she heard them. Footsteps. Soft, steady, moving across the ceiling. She smiled at the sound. Of course, the landlord must have meant a tenant who wasn't on the lease. Someone quiet, living in the upstairs unit. She drifted off, comforted that she wasn't completely alone. The next morning, Mia ran into the woman in the apartment next door carrying groceries. Mia smiled. "Hi, I just moved in. I think I hear your upstairs neighbor walking around at night too." The woman froze, her eyes sharp. "There's no one up there." Mia laughed nervously. "Oh, maybe the landlord?" The neighbor shook her head. "No one. That apartment has been empty for years." And then, without another word, she hurried inside. That night, the footsteps returned, steady pacing, from one end of the ceiling to the other, sometimes pausing, sometimes dragging, like heavy boots being pulled slowly. Mia lay awake, staring upward, heart beating faster with every creak. When she finally slept, her dreams were filled with shadows pacing above her, circling her bed. By the end of the week, the noises had grown louder. Not just footsteps. Knocks. Scrapes. The sound of something being dragged across the floor. And then one night, a sound that froze her blood. A chair creaking directly above her bed. She grabbed the broom, heart pounding, and jabbed the ceiling. Silence. For a moment, she let out a shaky laugh. Then slowly, the footsteps began again, this time matching her heartbeat. The next morning, she cornered the landlord in the hall. "You told me no one lives up there. Then why do I hear walking every night? Furniture moving, who is it?" He avoided her eyes. "The apartment is sealed," he said quietly. "No one should be there." "What do you mean sealed?" His voice dropped lower. "Don't go upstairs." And with that, he walked away, That night, she heard more than footsteps. She heard humming, a low, tuneless sound, like someone pacing and humming to themselves in the dark. The dog in the next unit howled until dawn. Mia didn't sleep at all. The following afternoon, unable to take it anymore, Mia found the stairwell at the end of the hall. It was taped off with old, peeling caution tape, but the door wasn't locked. Her flashlight beam cut through the dust as she pushed it open. The air smelled of mold, rot, and something sour underneath it all. Every step moaned under her weight as she climbed the narrow stairs. At the top, she found the door unlocked. The apartment was dark, empty. Dust coated the floor, untouched by human shoes. No furniture, no curtains. But the boards told a story. They were worn in a perfect line, a narrow path from one end of the room to the other. Over and over, as if someone had been pacing for years. Mia stumbled back, slamming the door, rushing down the stairs two at a time. That night, the pacing returned, but now it followed her. When she cooked dinner in the kitchen, the footsteps echoed above the kitchen ceiling. When she sat in the living room, they circled the space above her head. When she went to bed, they didn't stop. All night, the pacing continued as though something was mirroring her every move. On the last night, she woke to silence. The first silence in weeks. She almost cried in relief. Then she noticed the plaster above her bed cracking softly, a faint line splitting wider. She held her breath as a long, pale hand pushed through, fingers curling into her room. Slow, deliberate, reaching downward. The next morning, Mia's apartment was empty. Her belongings were still there, her bed unmade, her teacup still on the counter. But Mia was gone. The landlord plastered the ceiling the same day. And when new tenants asked about the noises upstairs, he always gave the same answer. Old building, the wood creaks. But everyone in the hall could still hear it. Footsteps, pacing, above, in the apartment that had been sealed for years. When Alex signed the lease on his little rental house on Maple Street, he thought he was getting a fresh start. It was small but cozy, one story, a tidy yard, and a chain-link fence separating his property from a sprawling, ivy-covered home next door. That house belonged to Mrs. Green, an elderly widow in her 70s who greeted him warmly the day he moved in. She baked cookies. She told him which trash days were strict in the neighborhood. She even lent him a rake when autumn leaves piled in his yard. She reminded Alex of his grandmother. But her house had one thing that unsettled him: the basement door. It was old, set into the side of the house like a storm shelter, rimmed with rusted iron. Not one, not two, but 3 heavy padlocks sealed it shut. Every time Alex walked by, his eyes were drawn to it. And every time Mrs. Green seemed to notice, she'd tug her cardigan close, glance at him nervously, and steer the conversation somewhere else. The first few weeks passed quietly. Alex settled into a routine. Work during the day, movies at night, beers on the porch. Sometimes Mrs. Green would chat with him about her garden or ask if he needed anything. But at night, when the street lights flickered and the town grew still, Alex began to notice noises, low thuds, muffled dragging sounds, scraping like heavy furniture pulled across concrete. At first, he told himself it was the old house settling. But one night, just past 2 a.m., he sat bolt upright in bed. Because this time, it wasn't thuds or scraping. It was knocking. 3 sharp knocks from the direction of Mrs. Green's basement. The next morning, he asked her about it. She smiled tightly. "Old pipes," she said. "The house shifts." But her hand shook as she set down her teacup, and her eyes lingered on the basement door as though afraid it might open at any moment. The noises grew worse. Sometimes Alex thought he heard a voice, faint and muffled. Not an adult voice, a child's. Once, as he stood at his kitchen sink, he swore he heard it drift through the open window. "Help me!" He froze, dishes still in his hands, staring across the fence at the locked door. Curiosity got the better of him. One afternoon, while Mrs. Green was out, Alex walked to the fence and leaned over. The door looked even older up close. The wood was warped and blackened. Around the edges, the paint was peeled away, exposing deep gouges, like fingernails, scraping desperately to get out. That night, Mrs. Green knocked on his door. Her face was pale, her eyes wet. "You need to promise me something," she whispered. "Never go near that basement. Never touch the locks. Do you understand?" Alex frowned. "Why?" Her lip trembled. "Because once it knows your name, it won't stop calling you." And before he could press her, she turned and hurried back into her house, slamming the door behind her. The following week, Alex was woken by his dog barking furiously. He stumbled out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and looked outside. The basement door was wide open. The padlocks dangled, unbroken but hanging loose, swaying in the night breeze. The black mouth of the basement yawned open, and from deep inside something shifted. Then a voice floated out, high-pitched, childlike, calling softly, "Alex!" He dropped the flashlight and bolted back inside, locking every door and window. When he dared look again, the door was shut. The lock's back in place. The next day he confronted Mrs. Green. Her face was ashen. "I warned you," she whispered. "You should never listen. It only needs you to hear it once." From then on, the voice came every night. At first faint from behind the locked basement. Then louder. "Alex, Alex, Alex." It repeated his name until the sound seemed to echo inside his skull. The dog whimpered and hid under the bed. Alex pressed his hands over his ears, trembling. But even then he could hear it. On the final night, the knocking started at 3 a.m. Slow, steady, boom, boom, boom. Then silence, and then the voice, not faint, not muffled, but inside his own house, whispering from the walls, "Alex, let me in." The next morning, Alex's house stood empty. The bed unmade, his dog's food untouched. The neighbors said they'd seen him the night before, standing at the fence, staring at the basement door as though in a trance. Mrs. Green was never seen again. Her house was eventually sold, but the new owners always boarded up the basement. No one could keep it sealed for long. And to this day, people walking down Maple Street late at night swear they hear it. Knocking, soft voices behind the door, calling names. When Sarah moved into the crumbling brick apartment complex on the edge of town, she was relieved to have found a place she could afford. It wasn't glamorous. The hallways smelled faintly of old carpet and cigarettes, the radiators clanked in the night, and the paint peeled in certain corners. But it was hers. She liked the way her little second-floor unit caught the morning sun. She liked her balcony, where she could drink tea in the evenings and watch the street below. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she might finally have a chance to rest. But that was before she noticed the neighbor across the hall. He wasn't like the others in the building, who nodded politely in the laundry room or exchanged small talk near the mailboxes. She saw him her very first night when she stepped into the hall to throw away moving boxes. His door was cracked open just a sliver. Behind it, a pale face stared out. The moment her eyes met his, the door closed softly. No words, no smile, just the quiet certainty that he had been watching her. The building manager later told her his name was Mr. Doyle. "He's been here for years," the manager said, shrugging. "Harmless enough. Just keeps odd hours." Odd hours, Sarah soon learned, was an understatement. The first time she truly noticed, it was 3 a.m. She'd woken thirsty and padded barefoot into the kitchen. As she passed her door, she saw light in the hall. Not from the fixtures, but from beneath his door. A soft, steady glow, pale and yellow. She thought little of it. People stayed up late. But when she left for work at 6:30 the next morning, the light was still on. And when she came home that evening at 7 p.m., it hadn't gone out. Days passed. Every time she came or went, the light was there, sometimes faint, like from a single lamp, sometimes stronger, flooding the hall with an unnatural glow. And occasionally, when she peered through her peephole, she saw him, standing motionless in the hall at odd hours, head tilted slightly, as if listening. At first, Sarah tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe he had insomnia. But then she began to hear the footsteps. It started one night around 2 a.m. She woke to the sound of slow pacing in the hallway. Hail, do, hail, do. Steady, measured. She lay frozen, listening. The footsteps passed her door, paused, then returned the other way, back and forth. For hours. The next morning, she gathered her courage and asked him. She caught him unlocking his door, his eyes bloodshot, his frame gaunt. Could you maybe not pace at night? She asked carefully. It's keeping me awake. He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. His eyes were too wide, ringed in dark shadows. I don't sleep, he whispered. And then he closed the door. From then on, it only escalated. The footsteps grew louder, sometimes breaking into frantic runs, then halting suddenly outside her door. She began to hear breathing, deep, ragged, right outside, as though he stood there with his ear pressed to the wood. When she dared to look through the peephole, the hall was empty. But once, just once, she swore she saw an eye staring back through the peephole at her, unblinking. Sarah confided in another tenant one afternoon, an older woman who lived on the first floor. The woman shook her head, whispering, "Don't let him know you're awake at night. Don't answer him. Don't look. If he thinks you're awake too, he won't stop." When Sarah asked what that meant, the woman simply walked away, refusing to speak further. The nights became unbearable. She stopped sleeping, lying in bed listening to the endless pacing. Sometimes he knocked. Always 3 times. Soft, patient, never forceful, but insistent. And once at 4 a.m., she heard the soft click of her doorknob turning, back and forth, testing. Sarah finally broke. She called the building manager, demanding to know who this man really was. The manager sighed. "Look, Doyle's been here forever. Pays on time, keeps to himself." Sarah's voice shook. "He walks the hall every night. He stares into people's doors. He doesn't sleep." The manager hesitated. And then quietly he said, "That's because he can't." And he hung up. On the final night, Sarah stayed awake with every light in her apartment on. At 2:47 a.m., the pacing began again. Back and forth, then silence, and then the knock. 3 soft taps. She held her breath, refusing to move. The knocking came again. Then slowly her doorknob began to turn. This time it wasn't testing. It was deliberate. Click, click, click. Sarah dialed 911, her voice shaking as she whispered for help. By the time the police arrived, the hallway was empty. Doyle's door stood ajar, light spilling into the hall. Inside, the apartment was bare. No bed, no food, no furniture. The only thing inside was a chair, placed perfectly in front of the window, facing outward, as though someone had been sitting there, night after night, watching. Sarah moved out the next week. But sometimes when she drives past the old brick building, she swears she can see him, sitting in that chair, unblinking, still awake. When Jordan signed the papers for his new home, he told himself he was finally done with city life. No more sirens in the middle of the night. No more neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. He wanted quiet. And the cul-de-sac seemed perfect. Tidy lawns, porch swings, and the sound of kids playing basketball in the street until the street lamps buzzed on. The first week was bliss. He unpacked slowly, waved at the mailman, even chatted with the woman next door about lawn care. It felt normal. Safe, almost too perfect. The house across the street was ordinary enough at first glance. White siding, green shutters, a porch swing that swayed lazily in the evening breeze, and a man who always waved. The first time Jordan saw him, he was dragging boxes out of his car. The man stood on his porch motionless, faint smile plastered on his face. He raised his hand in a slow wave. Jordan waved back automatically, then went inside. The next day, the same thing happened. And the day after that, every time Jordan stepped outside, for work, groceries, or even to grab his mail, the man was there. Smiling, waving. At first, Jordan laughed about it. Friendly neighborhood, he told his sister over the phone. The guy across the street waves like it's his job. But the more he noticed, the stranger it seemed. The man never left. Jordan never saw him mowing his lawn. Never saw a car in the driveway. Never saw him carry groceries inside. He just stood there, smiling, waving. One afternoon, Jordan mentioned it to the woman next door while she was watering her flowers. "Who's the guy across the street?" he asked casually. "He's, friendly." Her hand froze on the hose. Water spilled over the rim of the planter, soaking the dirt. Her eyes flicked to the house, then back to him. "Oh, that place," she muttered. "Don't worry about them." "Them?" Jordan frowned. "I've only seen one guy." She shook her head quickly. Best not to get involved. And she went inside without another word. That night, Jordan took his trash to the curb. The street was quiet, crickets chirping, air cool against his skin. He glanced across the road. The porch was dark, but the man was there, motionless, smile stretched, hand frozen mid-wave as though he had been standing like that for hours. Jordan's heart stuttered. He turned away quickly and hurried inside, locking the door. The next morning, he decided to be friendly. Maybe it was all in his head. He crossed the street, hand raised in greeting. "Hi there," he called. "I'm Jordan. Just moved in." The man didn't reply. Up close, the smile looked too wide, his lips stretched almost painfully. His eyes didn't move, didn't blink. He just waved, slowly, deliberately. Jordan mumbled something awkward and retreated unnerved. That night, the dog barked until 2 a.m. Jordan stumbled to the window, pulling the blinds. The porch across the street was empty. The swing swayed in the wind. Relieved, he turned away. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps on his front door. He froze. When he peeked through the window, no one was there. But across the street, the man was back, standing in his usual spot, smiling, waving. The days blurred. Jordan tried to focus on work, but every time he glanced outside, the man was there. The smile sharper, the wave more insistent. And once, coming home late, Jordan froze when he saw the man not on his porch but at the edge of Jordan's driveway, standing perfectly still, smiling, waving. A car passed, headlights sweeping the street, and the man was gone. But when Jordan looked back across the road, the porch light flicked on, and the man stood there again. The neighbors grew cold when Jordan pressed for answers. One evening, he caught the mailman stuffing envelopes into the box and asked, "So what's the deal with the guy across the street? He's always out there." The mailman's face drained of color. "Nobody's lived in that house for years," he muttered. Before Jordan could reply, the man walked off quickly, almost running. That night, Jordan sat on the couch, blinds drawn, TV off. He tried to convince himself he was imagining things, until he heard it. 3 knocks. This time on the living room window. Heart pounding, Jordan pulled the blinds. No one was there. But across the street, the man's wave had changed. It wasn't slow anymore. It was frantic. Up and down, sharp, desperate, as though he was trying to signal something. Jordan's sleep disintegrated. He started seeing the man in dreams, endless rows of him, all smiling, all waving, until his arms ached from trying to wave back. And when he woke, sweating, the man was still there, waiting, watching. On the final night, Jordan snapped. He grabbed a flashlight and stormed across the street, climbing the porch steps. The man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't stop waving. Jordan's breath came fast. He reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, the door swinging open with a soft creak. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. The house was dark, empty, no furniture, no sign of life, except the living room. Jordan's flashlight beam trembled across rows of old wooden chairs, dozens of them, all facing the front window, and in each chair sat a figure, smiling, waving, perfectly still, perfectly synchronized. Jordan stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. The figures didn't move, but one of them, the one closest to the window, slowly turned its head and smiled wider. The next morning, Jordan's house was found unlocked. His car was still in the driveway. His dog barked at the window until neighbors called animal control, but Jordan was gone. And when the sun set that evening, there were more figures across the street. Neighbors swore they saw a new one standing on the porch, smiling, waving. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.